Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode. In tonight's episode, I would like to speak about an observation I've made. And I tried to put this observation in a sentence, and I came up with the dehumanized consequence of population growth and technological progress. And there's something I've noticed, which viewers can comment in the chat section or in the comment section. They can share their feedback. But anyways, I'm gonna get into it. I'll need the notepad for this episode so it makes sense for viewers to look at the screen. And I'd say this if you're new. My fascination with reality is to comprehend it in time and then wonder about its implications if somehow the species in the future experiences timeless modes of being. Ultimately, we're starting in an unknown world, and that's where I would say my psyche finds its permission to speak to my species. There we go. So I'll start off with this. The dehumanized consequence of let's say population growth and technological progress. So I'll start off with the concept of dehumanized. What does it mean? When intelligence no longer just identifies as the human archetype. Some people are under the impression that going into the future, we will still be humans, right? But the mind has a capability to probabilize potentials where that is not happening, and rather than it's just going to be humans forever, right? It could be that certain events take place, or due to certain demands of the outer realms or inner realms, our psychology shifts, and pretty much being human could be a phase in nature. This is a considerable idea. Excuse me. It might be something that right now everybody's trying to, fit into the world as a human being, and I'm talking about dehumanization. But really what I'm trying to say is that due to population growth and technological progress, let me say it this way. Population growth is natural, and technological progress is unnatural. Okay. Guys, I'm trying to see what music to play in the background. Okay, let's try this. Okay, to speed this up, to get to somewhere here, we have the story of humanity. The story of humanity is an evolutionary animal somehow attained a subjective position to itself, and it began modifying the subjective position to the degree that it started identifying with language. Right, you see, human beings are not just creatures that stood on their legs and are dressed in clothing. They are actually dressed in ideology, and we stand up into ideas. Right, human beings are not just living in a physical environment, and that is the beginning of, you could say, the mystical path. Right, many people feel that the idea of spirituality means an evasion or escapism from reality, but mysticism does not mean that fantasy or any story gets to override the direct unknownness of the direct experience. Our humanization, how we're being human, it's actually a conscious effort, and it's an act of concentration. Okay, it's an energetic effort that is being single pointed. When a human being identifies with their name, that's an attempt for the energy or intelligence that they are to become a single point in the space-time continuum of the reality. As the creature stood up in nature, right, it began to have a different vision, a different sense of sight. And when, in the evolutionary scheme, I call it the subjective evolution, when we stood up as a conscious self or a conscious thought, or in yogic context, they call it an I thought, that moment where an individual noticed everything else. That individualism, on some level, it's we have to consider it natural. But I would say it like this: that pretty much for this episode, guys, this is my vision. I'm like, okay, it was a human being, bunch of creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere. That's nature right there. Okay, then these creatures began creating things to live in, right? That means we did not just create houses for our bodies to live in. We didn't create shelter, like let's say physical houses. We also created conceptual domains for our minds to have a sort of valid selfhood in, right? Now, what I'm noticing is that when the population, I'm just going based on a sense of how life was, let's say, like 100 years ago, and how life will be 100 years from now. And it's like I have access to this present, and this talk's being recorded in 2022. So, I would say that, let me see how I could paint the picture. What I'm trying to say is that there's more dimensions to the world being added, not just by there being more human beings and there being human beings communicating to one another. It's pretty much creatures, natural creatures, created an unnatural world. And the purpose of the unnatural world, where you can call this civilization 1.0, was to, in some sense, hide from, you could say, the early consciousness on the planet from children of the species, which is technically everybody. It's kind of like our ancestors experienced the savageness of the world, and they had an effort to survive or move beyond it, and in going beyond it, they used an unnatural system. Civilization is unnatural because the greatest technologies that human beings are trying to find, it's as if those technologies are trying to replicate or mimic nature, right? That means it's like there's probably like, big groups of scientists trying to create a robot that is like the closest thing to a human possible. So it's kind of like we can by just having this idea that technology is trying to copy nature, it's as if it is lacking the original naturalness of it, right? So that's why I'm saying it's unnatural. Now, a technology, you can say, is a usable system. And so, really, we are not just in one world. We are actually in 3+ worlds. So let me explain what I mean by this. The species had a physical life, kind of surviving in the jungles of the planet. Then the species developed language, developed self-identity, and then it began living in communities which had ideological value. So it's as if there's a natural world, there's a world of language where we're all living in it. We've been conditioned in it so that it's so second nature we don't doubt it, right? It's as if 3 simulations, okay? Or let's say it this way, first world is the natural world. Then we have the world of language, the linguistic world, and then we have the world of mind beyond. I ask myself in this moment, what is beyond my body? The answer comes that it is my mind. I ask myself what is beyond my mind, and I notice that before I decide on being anything in the moment, there is an awareness that is viewing the possibility. That means, imagine I can say the word apple and I could say the word orange right now, but before I say them, it's as if within the awareness that is my moment, I am aware that I can say either one. Do you see? There is an inner realm and there's an outer realm. We started in the outer realms, we created an inner realm through language, and then this inner realm through language is leading towards a technological reality. So it's as if the first world is Earth, the second world is the story of Earth, and the third world is cyberspace, which is yet to arrive. So it's like a matter-oriented life, a biological-oriented life, a linguistic, language-oriented life, and a digital life, right? And we are headed to the digital life because the present is in some sense trying to copy the past and the past's dream. Do you know? Our ancestors escaped out of the jungles, let's say into the concrete jungle, and that was due to language acquisition of a species. And now, to go beyond this, to go beyond a natural world, a semi-natural, semi-unnatural linguistic world, and an unnatural, you can say, civilization. It's like we don't realize it, but our psychology is living life with an access to more dimensions than our body. So it's as if the body is in a limited room, the mind, strangely, is in an unknown, appearing, limitless room. The question is, when it comes to the future and the future generations, for how long are we going to remain human? Or in some sense, what is the destiny of the human archetype? That could have been a great title for this episode, actually. The destiny of the human archetype. The observation, I'll keep going back to this. Population growth, right? That means right now we're living at a time where there's so many human beings, and human beings were engaged with the natural dimensions of their world, but due to technology and just ideological expressionism of growing populations, right? It's as if the human being is shifting. You know what it is? It's kind of like the way human beings are living is like a conversion of a creature dependent on a natural environment to a creature that is dependent on an unnatural environment. Because it's still early for the species of this conversion from natural to unnatural, this is why I find human beings that are alive today, right? Especially due to there being so many different kinds of people doing so many different things, right? It's as if I feel the modern generations are experiencing an unnatural isolation, an unnatural psychological isolation. And this is due to the agenda of what's going to happen here on this planet shifting to you know what it is? It's kind of like technology has become the selection. The more human a natural being depends on technology for the movements of its natural life, at some point it's going to just accept that it's a technological entity. The dehumanized consequence of how human beings are living now, pretty much, is that we may become immortal robots in the future. That could be possible. It could be that technology makes the body replaceable, right? So what does that mean? That means imagine somebody, let's say is works in construction, and, you know, it's like suddenly they decide instead of having natural biological human arms, they can choose to have, let's say, robotic arms or android arms, right? Now, eventually, imagine technology, we unlock the secrets of nanotechnology, and so it's as if like our technology becomes indistinguishable from the appearance of the natural. So as if like a prosthetic, I shouldn't say prosthetic, an android arm in the future can be so well made that it is indistinguishable from the person's natural one. Do you know? That means it's as if like it's going to happen in a way where we're going to still look human, but behind our human skin, parts of our body will not be human. Right? Because the human archetype is an appearance, and simultaneously it's the preservation of an experiential decency. Right? Imagine the story of reality was flipped around. Imagine like we were in a parallel universe of Earth. Instead of everybody trying to be a good, member of civilization, it was the opposite, right? It was as if like we started good, we wanted to be evil. But imagine now, in this universe, we started evil, and now we're like, what is the destiny of evil? It's poetic, that would be a sort of dehumanized consequence of more and more people relying on technology for life. There's moments, I'll be honest, there's some moments where I get a bit emotional, and where we all be, that thought arises to me. What is the purpose of human life? And to some degree, it's about ignoring the macrocosm so that you can find, the fool's contentment of the microcosm. It's as if the person, opens its eyes in a world and begins asking questions. Am I a human being on Earth? Am I a mind in the galaxy? Or am I, an attributeless witness of the cosmos? What am I? What is here? And what is moving through all these creatures? And could it have a potential to be a singular circle? There was a time where I thought it's kind of like a cruelty-kindness ratio. if the nature of human beings is like, let's say it starts off 50% cruel, 50% kind, if the cruelty goes beyond 50%, it's as if there's, believe it or not, there is no hope. It's as if it's like the evil, let's say, I shouldn't say evil, I should say the destructive patterns in man's mind, if they have a greater momentum, let's say the inefficient destructive patterns have a greater momentum than the efficient constructive patterns. It's like if cruelty wins, that advanced civilization was a dream. If kindness wins, that advanced civilization was a possibility. Really, what is life? It's like choosing what story fits the world. And the stories are limited to your experiences, it's like an incomplete entity seeking completion till the end of its, believe it or not, dissolution of incompletion. That means it's like we are born not knowing everything that is going on in this universal sector, and the task of our life has become to get to know it, right? There was a time where I thought if the concept of God consciousness truly existed, it would mean no longer human life needs to exist. That means it's like the paradox of, I would say this is the great paradox of religion. How a conceivable entity is trying to connect to an inconceivable source. It's as if it's just a game of expectations and then experiencing the unexpected. That's it. It's like, imagine somebody wonders what is the true value of their memories so far in this life, like whoever you are listening to me. Whatever life you have lived up to this point, it's like when the question comes, what is the value of the journey of life? And the answer would be like experiential accumulation of new dimensions, but then the question is like, what is the value of a creature endlessly accumulating information until it no longer can't as a biological entity? Pretty much there's a human being. And this human being, or I should draw it differently. sphere of self, the sphere of other, or plural others. We have the world, and then we have the, let's say, greater self. It's like this: S1, O1, W1, then S2, O2, W2, S3, O3, W3. And as long as there is an unknown effort moving in the moment, there could be infinite realities. That means my mind can visualize, like, okay, I'm a self, there's going to be a greater self, and that's going to have a greater self, a greater self, a greater self, and it's like eventually the greatest self is an infinite revelation, right? And it's like a creature that thought it had to, in some sense, do something in the world, wonders about the nature of its being, how it's being in the world, you know? It's like, imagine somebody is, has a controller in their hand and there's a remote control car moving, right? And imagine that remote control car suddenly it's like you're experiencing yourself as the remote control car, and you suddenly realize you're this unknown being that is held onto the controller of what is moving the human entity. We are actually not just what is in our moment of being, we are the whole moment of being. It's like everything is wondering how it's being everything at once. When I was young, people spoke about the idea of the soul in a very, friendly, happy way, But its actual reality is it's like going through the shell shock of the realization that an unknown event is taking place. And the meaning of life cannot possibly just be to figure this out. It's as if like we are the small part, we are the micro and the macro, we're the small and the big. And it's as if life can't just be trying to analyze and calculate like an endless world, So if the purpose of life, by the nature of being too big for our intellect to contain, then it's as if what is the purpose of the intellect? And just to reduce it to survivalism is not enough, you know. I honestly feel like, imagine somebody going to a theme park for the first time ever, and they've never had the concept of a theme park before, right? Like, with what fascination and wonder would they look at that, you know? You know, what children actually have is pure fascination, and this pure fascination is, you know, conditionally shackled to, you know, the past's conviction. You know, it's like right now we could probably, you know, organize everybody on the planet as if whose beliefs on reality are starting from the past, whose beliefs are starting from the present, and whose beliefs are starting from the future. And right now, I would say there's a few. Right now, it's such an incredible point in history, because human beings, if you define yourself based on your past, the image, like the shape of the past, is there. You can't do anything about it. But if somebody wants to be defined by their future, that means if a memory is a past self, right? You know, let's say the person wants to identify with a future self. To identify with the future self, it's as if it depends on your own nature of attention. The cool thing about how life is designed is that nobody can actually teach anything to anyone. Let me tell you why. Because the teachings are actually transmissions from one inner realm, inner universe, to the other person's inner universe. So let me draw this out. So let's say we have person A and we have person B. Now, what's actually happening is that person A and B, they think they're just in one world, but in actuality, this is what's happening. And they're both, of course, inside the physical world. So I would say the outer universe. Outer realm universe. The outer universe. Now, person B, this circle I've drawn is universe B. And for person A, so universe A, this is what I call the inner realms. This is an inner universe of person A. And by the way, everybody has an inner universe. And the efficiency of communication is how our inner universes can lead to the collaboration of a third universe. So when two people, person A and B, start having a conversation, they both start existing in the same world, right? So we call this, let's say, universe AB, right? And the important thing is to realize that every person has unknown dimensions to them. Therefore, we could have never judged anyone ever. We could have never judged anyone to be, let's say, a fool, and we could have never judged anyone to be an enlightened being. Why? Because there are unknown dimensions to the context where the concept of enlightenment is found. And believe it or not, this is what I would say. Smiling yogis preaching love won't tell you, right? That it's as if there is an unknownness to it all. And because we haven't realized the unknown, we shackle ourselves to a known identity. And what is suffering us being like, why isn't my inner universe, or why isn't the outer universe seeing my inner universe, or why am I not seeing the outer universe, right? These are like where there's existential complexities that happen, right? Now, person A and B, we could have a way where it's like, it could be like this, So this was the past picture. Now it's as if person A and B, their universes connect, right? So this is like pretty much reality, right? Like the concept of getting to know another person is getting to know actually in what sort of inner visionable world they're walking in, right? And then interest arises based on that, right? I have seen some people where they blindly walk in their inner universe, and what I mean by that is that it's like the functioning of it's kind of strange, right? It's as if in order to succeed in a physical world, we gotta be physical, right? But if we wanted to succeed in an inner, non-physical world, right? In that non-physical world, it all goes back to how attention has simulated it. So what really person A and B is that they are in an unknown outer universe, the mystery of how inner universes are appearing. So there's like let's say a fascination about like, oh my God, how am I being a person? And then there comes a fascination is how am I being existent at all? With what comparison or context can I find certainty in existence existing? Like, how can someone know existence is existing? Right? We see that in a dualistic context, we can't. Life will appear as a simulation. In a singular context, it's possible, but we lose our humanity. That means it's as if a person can be enlightened, but they won't be human. And so that's something I realized about mysticism. I'm like, okay, somebody needs to talk about how the search for the beyond can dehumanize you, not in the sense that you see something dehumanized, but rather dehumanizes you by shifting how the idea of a human being is there in the first place. And this shift in mysticism happens experientially, right? And spirituality, people think it's just how the past gave away a secret. Not at all. You could say poetically, the greatest spiritual teachings on this planet have not been happened yet. Do you know? That means right now we're all born on Earth, a natural world, and we're like, yeah, we're here, this is Earth. Imagine in the future generations, after cyberspace becomes an intimate part of our minds. Imagine a human being that has to escape has to escape a bunch of simulations just to come to the Earth that we are taking for granted now. By the way, I am not somebody who's considering I have all the answers, but I feel I have found the ultimate questions. You know, how an inner life has a relationship with an outer life suggests the possibility of more future inner lives. Because what is a soul? What is being alive? It is being conscious that you're being conscious. As some scholars said it once, it's the awareness of awareness. And this is the ultimatum, because the mind, the person has to ask this question, you know, it's like, if my mind is not an object, you know, like how Bodhidharma, you know, a patriarch of Buddhism, suggested. Beyond the ideas that, like, Iron Man suits were moving in, where does the mystery of being lead? In the future, there will be a liminal dimension to culture. There's going to be human beings that are going to be forgotten. And that's when it becomes close to, I'm thinking 200 years from now, or maybe more, where cyberspace is like AI was, you know, a strange gift of the unnatural gods, you know. Or poetically, God's unnatural gift to man. Is life a sequence of decisions and actions? And is life just an overcoming the challenges of perception game? The reality of the situation is that the let's say unnatural illusion of civilized entities in the world. Okay, how would I say it? It's like civilization's simulation, or the simulation of the ideological simulation of how we are to be a human being now is so solid that it doesn't have the fluidity to begin to realize that a person can choose to identify with memories, or they can choose to identify with the space where new experiences happen. My strategy is, when I talk about Civilization 2.0, my strategy is that how do we advance all dimensions accessible to the human being? That means it would be another way of what would be the most advanced biological and natural life we can have on this earth. Then it would be like, what would be the most advanced life that our minds can live, can experience, right? And then the question would be like, if there are dimensions beyond human knowledge, how do we plan for it? You know, something that breaks my heart is that the species is so under the enchantment of being happy in the moment that it has forgotten that the civilization needs to update, right? And it only updates when human beings care for the world they live in, right? And people are different. Like, what I've understood is everybody has blind spots. Everybody has unknown variables in their conscious moment. Now, what do we do with these unknown variables? It's as if the greatest challenge of mankind was not like the world peace. The greatest challenge of mankind is, what do we do in the void? That is the great challenge. That's honestly the great task. Advanced civilizations are built as retaliations to this question, as responses to this question. In the middle of nowhere, how are we being a person that is choosing to define anything at all? And you get this kind of rare feeling of your own sight, that as if you have discovered the eyes that never went anywhere, that never moved. The nature of being has a lot to do with stillness, the nature of singular being. But when we move and communicate, that's the nature of multidimensional being. So right now, think of it this way: because I am moving and speaking, my experience of self is more multidimensional than singular. But if I was just to sit down and do nothing, that would be more of kind of like commanding the nature of the simulated mind to become singular, right? And the most fascinating thing is that man's challenge is not to know more about the known. Man's challenge is to establish a relationship with the unknown variables of life, which we have ignored. An unknown variable of life, like if somebody was like, okay, is Mr. Within a good person, bad person? It's as if as long as there is unknown variables, it's like we can never identify anyone as anything, right? I mean, a person's actions, sure, they give us an impression, but that impression is kind of like, you know, a snapshot photo rather than the film that is the actual entity. What an inner universe implies, or what your mind implies, is that the world is happening in the boundaries of awareness. Right now, my body is part of the moment. Like if I was to consider, okay, what is the limits of my being, right? I would be like physically the edge of my body, but non-physically, it's like, where is my body? It is in how the brain is acting as a vacuum for the sight around it. Now, it could be that I'll draw one more thing on this picture for the notes and I'll close it. The mystery of reality, you know. The purpose of human life is a conscious, advanced response to emptiness. Really, what is defining every people's lives? They usually say that, you know, as when somebody fears something, that fear defines their life and it limits them, right? So it's as if, what is it that everybody fears? It is the unknown. Like with the unknown destination of everything, right? That means like right now I'm alive, I don't have like that much of a fear of the unknown, right? But if suddenly, like, you know, I reach the point where I had to transition out of this earth room, it would be as if like, okay, there would be a slight nervousness. It's as if there's a nervousness of giving a PowerPoint presentation, you know, in front of an audience, and then there's the nervousness of like the attention leaving its manifest existence. Leaving it or not identifying with it, right? It's as if like we, you know, they say in you know, self-help sector, yeah, you know, there's this new Agean view where it's like love yourself, but the strange thing is that this life is designed that this self we have loved, right, actually it's the physical body will leave one day. And it's kind of like, to me, physical entities, you know, headed for a non-physical destination, and the strategy shouldn't be just enjoying the physical, you know, it would be to try to discover the non-physical, right? For some people, spirituality is like, an unnecessary idea. But for others, it's like, who says that the dimensions of the mind of a human being should be limited? Who has made a judgment on unknown potentials of attention, right? It's like, in reality, freedom is like a permission. I feel the species, this is Mr. Within's definition of an advanced civilization. If somebody was like, I'm writing a book on this, but for me, an advanced civilization. What am I doing? An advanced civilization extends into three. It expands into 4 dimensions. I call this ring of the absent heaven. I've given a poetic name to this one. So human beings, let's say somehow, they heard, I don't know, a podcast, and they were like, all right, let's have the whole species build an advanced civilization. That is the victory of victories, So in order to do that, the species has to overcome 4 challenges, I'll write in here, 4 challenges. Now, when it comes to the dimension of 0, it's like, what is the species going to do about emptiness? That means when our species no longer panics because of emptiness, that means, like, this might sound strange, but in the future there could be a possibility of, a civilization where human beings are so conscious of the multiple dimensions of life that they do not fear, the exiting of one dimension of life. So there would be, as if, like, we have birth and death, but it would be like casual. Like when somebody's born, the doctor says, welcome back, right? And when the person is about to leave, this die, like from this, let's say the person's about to die, it would be as if, like, see you later, and then that's it. That means there would be no emotional attachment to something that we have finally understood by the acknowledgement that the unknown is the presence of multidimensional being. So what is the species going to do about emptiness and the void? Then we have the singular. It's like, what is the species going to do about oneness or singularity? And then, what is the species about the infinite chaos and order? means the species requires to find an incredible strategy towards acknowledging emptiness, needs to find an incredible strategy to acknowledge oneness, singularity, the individualism, and then it needs an incredible strategy to, in some sense, acknowledge chaos and order or duality. And when it comes to infinity, this is not going to be a problem, right? That means right now, you could say a singular strategy is for all of us to live in civilization, but a strategy towards the void that we're taking is that we're trying to ignore it, right? So if it's like another way, this is to me a vision of an advanced human being. An advanced human being can experience a moment of being that is equal to zero. That means nothing is being nothing, or nothing, or something that is nothing is actually being nothing, right? So what I'm trying to say is like our fear of emptiness, right? And then when it comes to the singular dimension, so it's like the person is not afraid of emptiness. The person has an ability, the advanced member of civilization, has an ability to, in some sense, be like, how would I say it? You're comfortable being nothing. You're comfortable being something. You're comfortable experiencing the something in duality, right? That means you're comfortable with attention shifting from 0 to 1, right? And then we're comfortable beyond duality with infinity, and this is where this is going to be part of like the cultural development of an advanced civilization. Why? Because it would be like the human being is no longer identifying as a temporary entity, but as an infinite infinite energy. So what is the species going to do about infinity? It's like the answer, the strategy to that is that we already are, right? And so if these 4 quadrants of the psyche are acknowledged, I am telling you, this you could say simple system I've designed, the ring of the absent heaven, it's going to hold within it all philosophical possibility, because I thought about what is knowledge, and its knowledge is all about what story is being told, and what a story is kept in duality. Right, because it is kept in duality, then it's as if the 0, 1 to infinity apply. That means if we were just oneness, it would be like there would be nobody here, right? There would be no individual here, right? If we were emptiness, there would be no, as if there's not even individuality here. There's nothing, like there's no content. And duality that's what we've been privileged to experience, right? Like that's where we find ourselves. But to go to experience a dimension of infinity, let me tell you, it's like this is for geometric beings. The identification with the geometry of conscious experience of existence, rather than what sort of language the geometry connects to. That means in one angle we're not just being people in a world, we're actually being the geometric movements of a universal cycle. Anyways, guys, my laptop's has 11% battery, and I just want whoever is listening to wonder, what is the purpose of the future if our certainty is only based on the past? That means it's like, I would say, this is, I would say, a modern achievement if we pull this off, where human beings can not only identify, like through a dimension of time, it's as if you have a past, it's like in this life, you have a past life, and you have a present life, and there's a future life. Right, that means if they ask somebody, it's like, what was your, tell me, it's like the person's like, let's say they ask someone, do you remember your past lives? And the person's like, yeah, I do. I remember my past life, and the person's like, okay, what were you doing in your past life? And the person's like, yesterday I was eating a lasagna. So that's technically a past life. You know what I'm saying? It's past. Yes, it's like if the present life is new, then the yesterday was who we were. Right, and the incredible thing of what memories are, or I gave a talk on this, where they're the past echoing into the future. It's as if we lived a moment of life, we didn't forget who we were in that moment, and even though we're living new moments of life, that moment has an implication, has an influence. And there is something where I think that it's unmentioned often, but when a person actually experiences, let's say, mystical states for some time, it dehumanizes you. And when it dehumanizes you, it's another way of saying your reliance on how your being becomes less identified with how the body is being, and less identified with how, you know what it is? It's as if the mind has an ability to leap beyond its own images. And when it leaps too fast, at some point, the mind, your inner life is moving at such a faster speed than your outer life that it cannot adjust to the outer life. Do you know? And that's the challenge. That's like what really building an advanced civilization means. How can we have 8 billion different DNAs which develop into their own inner lives, serve the outer lives, right? I'm a bit old school, and I like the idea of kings and queens. Like if somebody said, the time machine could go back in the past, right? Let's say you had like a time traveler had a time machine, but the time machine was broken. When it came to going into the future, it was restricted. And the time machine, the only way you could use it is to go back to your own, and go back to the past in history, right, in the outer realms. So it's like if somebody was like, told me I had to choose, I would go back to a time where there were kings and queens. And there were kings where, let me tell you what I mean. It was the idea, it was the symbol that every person, is in some sense serving the highest ideal of character. Do you know what I'm saying? That means imagine there was a king, like for example, and there's examples in Indian culture of like enlightened kings. Like a name is Janika, for example, right? But I'm just trying to say that for me, that idea is alluring, and it's alluring because when I think about the future and an advanced civilization, I find myself to be a servant of the advanced civilization. Do you know? That means our inner personal lives are actually here to serve the collective outer life. Somebody in the chat section says, Mr.Within, please suggest some tips of meditation. Before meditating, get a piece of paper and a pen and write down what is your biggest question. That means try to figure out if you had a question about this whole life, this world, what would that question be, and write it down. And when you go to meditate, it's another way of saying you're just being there. You're just watching your mind like a cinema, like if you were in a cinema theaters. Right? When somebody watches a movie, they're selfless. They're like the purest souls ever because they're looking at what's on the screen. They're not actually being themselves. So it's a selfless state, after you have discovered where your unknown variable is, the next step is to pretty much just trust the moment, sit down, and watch the moment. And it's another way of saying, like, when you're not trying to be anything, or you're not looking for anything, then everything is possible. If you access that state, and let me see, I feel I could say it in a more simpler way. If somebody was like, if I had to meditate right now, the relationship I have with meditation is not really like something I got to sit down in a certain way to access a state. For me, that I've realized the nature of my mind. So it doesn't matter if my body's moving, right? For me, it's like the awareness is still there. It's just the awareness wonders about how it's being, right? And you'll notice your mind. That's the point of meditation. It's to notice how your mind is happening rather than expecting something from it, And I'm one of the very few people who has spoken in other talks and have said you need to make your mind your ally. You need to befriend it, right? And that has to do with how much your current archetype abides by its decency. Imagine there's an advanced version of everybody watching them from an invisible dimension. That advanced version will not engage this current version until the current version has a capacity to see beyond what it thinks it has to be. I don't know what else I can say other than have faith in how your mind will reveal itself to you instantly the moment you can simply be. That's it. Meditation is another way of saying what is the most simplest state where truth is standing. The simplest way truth is standing. Anyways, this episode is to say that deep down, I love everything in this universal sector that has a will to move beyond. That means I made it easy for myself, and because I love the universal sector, it's as if it's like everything in it is lovable. As much as I hate some things, you know what it is? I took mysticism too seriously, and that seriousness liberated me from a lot of things, but also it took away some, how would I say it? It's as if like, imagine you're a character in a video game, and for a moment you log out of the video game experience, you're not the character in the video game, and then you log back into the video game. And then that character has that knowledge of how it had logged out, who it was when it was logged out. So it's like what happens really is that it's certainty in life by the awareness and realization that the unknown is not something to fear. It is something actually to experientially trust enough to know. It's as if when you find I've said this in other talks, this play of words where I say when you find your real eyes, you are realized. And the nature of it will go post-enlightenment, because an enlightened being, that's like, imagine someone's meditating to get enlightened. It's like, what are you doing? The point is like an enlightened being does not have the idea of an enlightened to be enlightened. It just is. You see, some things you're just instantly being, right? If freedom is not one of that, then whatever you try, it's like it's like the permission has not been authorized in the inner universe before it can be authorized in the outer universe. And really, like, what can I say? We're in a mysterious world, and these are the lives we live. Thanks for listening. Much blessings and namaste.